Alright, what's going on, guys? Over the last few weeks, I've been playing the new Soulslike game, Wuchang Fallen Feathers. I just rolled the credits on my first playthrough at about 50 hours, playing very thoroughly, trying to do all the side content, all the secret content, and I'm gonna be honest with you guys, this is not going to be a very objective review, because I think I enjoyed this game a lot more than I should have. This is a good Souls-like game that's rough around the edges, but man, I cannot put it down, and I'll explain the good and the bad, and hopefully you can see what I mean. I'll be keeping the video mostly spoiler free. In a game like this, it's important to show the full capabilities of what combat looks like when you actually master the systems, because that's one of the main selling points of the game. But let me start by painting you the picture of what this game is.
The wheel of fate turns beyond our eyes.
Since playing Black Myth Wukong last year, I kinda been on a kick with these games set in medieval China. Wuchang Fallen Feathers has you playing at the height of the Ming dynasty in a world ravaged by a disease called the feathering, and you play as Bai Wuchang, who's afflicted by the feathering, but only to the extent that it's taken her left arm and left her without most of her memories. This is the setup for the adventure, as you explore the land of Shu, trying to figure out what happened, who you are, and how to cure this feathering. Now, as you might expect, the game has a very standard Souls-like formula to it. You travel along fairly linear levels, at least in the beginning, fighting enemies, exploring to find loot, seeking out checkpoints that give you back your healing items and respawn all the enemies until you get to a big boss fight. Again, if you played Souls games, which if you're watching this channel, I'm sure you have, you know exactly how this works. Now, I'm gonna say something that might be a little controversial to other people that reviewed this game. I think Wuchang has some of my favorite level design that I've ever seen from a non-From Software Souls-like. Exploration in this game is an absolute blast, and a lot of times I would be happy to defeat a boss just so I could explore a new level. The layout of the world of this game is incredibly well done, but we'll break that down more in a bit. Where I think the game sets itself apart the most is in combat though, and to me this was the biggest draw. I love the combat in this game. It takes a while to figure out, but once you do, it is extremely satisfying, super fast paced, and really feels a lot like the best moments of Bloodborne combat, especially when you're up against another humanoid and you can kind of get this back and forth dance going. But like I said, there is a pretty big learning curve. It took me a while to figure out how to actually play the game, so let me get into the specifics of how things work. For the moment-to-moment combat, the basis of it, like I said, you can tell is very built around the style of Bloodborne. You have the quick step dodge, pretty generous iframes, as well as the strong attack to the back to trigger a visceral attack. Though it does take a little bit to figure out the timings, it felt great once I did. The biggest divergence in combat though, comes in the form of feathering abilities and a system called Skyborn Might, where successful dodges and light attack combos give you feathering stacks, which you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, and you use these stacks to pop off spells or trigger unique attacks with your weapon. And so combat is this series of constantly comboing your light attacks, heavy attacks, alongside feathering abilities to get in as much DPS as possible. Now you can play it slow, and I did for a while, but I found much more success just trying to stay in the pocket in the fights. Kinda like Sekiro, not in that you're deflecting, but in that you're learning the rhythm of each fight. Again, like a dance. Now to get into some specifics of how things work, there are 5 weapon types in Wuchang. You have long swords, one-handed swords, dual daggers, spears, and axes, and each one has their own skill tree that you can spec into and unlock a wide range of abilities. Now to be honest, I ended up just sticking with the long sword for the entire game. I really didn't touch any of the other weapon types because it just worked, and long swords and great swords are always what I go for in Souls-likes anyway. And this leads me into one of my major critiques of the game. There are only 25 weapons in total, 5 of each kind, and 5 of those you get from the deluxe edition. Now, that does not mean the game is pay to win, at least from my observation, because the one from the deluxe edition was outclassed almost immediately. And another critique of that, the second longsword I got in the game ended up being the best for the entire game. It wasn't even close, mainly because it had the ability to stretch out like a whip, and the sheer range of this thing just made it into its own playstyle. Now that ended up not really bothering me, because like I said, the main draw of the combat comes from the abilities you spec into, but yeah, that is a pretty big critique I have. There's also a system in the the game called Madness, where after you die a set number of times, you will go into a maddened state where you deal more damage but also take more damage. And this is indicated by the icon in the bottom left glowing red and your character having red eyes. But also if you're in this state, randomly throughout the level you will be hunted by a demon, and at the beginning of the game they're really hard to deal with, especially if you get caught off guard fighting other enemies. But you can get rid of the madness by killing the demon or visiting one of the special shrines in the game. But yeah, overall combat was my favorite part of the game by far. I really enjoy fast-paced Souls-likes. This one takes a little while to figure out, but once you do, man, it's an absolute blast. But now let's talk about the game's world and story. And this is another part of the game that I personally really enjoyed. Now, a lot of Souls-likes will claim to have Dark Souls 1 level design, and most of the time they don't. Wuchang, though, gets pretty close. There actually are a lot of moments in this game where you'll have been exploring for several hours and find a random gate that opens up back to one of the game's main hubs, or decide to go into a cave you find and uncover an entire new level with multiple boss fights. And I did this, and ended up accidentally skipping the entire third chapter of the game, and playing through chapter 4 at a much lower level than intended. And yes, the game is broken up into chapters, but the world is all connected. And what I can say is that world is definitely worth exploring every single nook and cranny, because there are secrets around every corner. Some secrets that lead to some of the best boss fights in the game. And yes, they are missable. And in typical Souls-like fashion, oftentimes you'll find important NPCs way off the beaten path, with quests that are very important at unlocking new abilities or side content. Now the game does tell you when at a certain checkpoint there's an NPC with a new prompt to talk to, and while that does help, they're still very easy to fail their quest. And I'm pretty sure I locked myself out of the secret ending of the game because I opened a door before talking to an NPC, and that was me even being extremely thorough. Now here's where I need to interject another pretty heavy criticism on this game. Overworld graphics. For some reason, this game will have some of the best and clearest graphics I've seen in a game, and 5 minutes later have some of the worst. There were a lot of times I just stood and stared at the environment because it was so beautiful, and then there were other sections where I literally couldn't even tell what was going on because it was so muddy. And I think it was due to the depth of field setting on PS5. It kept turning itself off and on randomly. In areas with a lot of overcast shadows, the shadows would be rendered in very poor resolution and make everything they touched bad resolution as well. Most of the time the game looked fine, but there are just a handful of areas in this game where you'll get a lot of ghosting, particle effects that are in like 240p, and just overall muddiness. And unfortunately, a lot of that happens right at the beginning. I'm sure you can correct a lot of that on PC, but on PlayStation, there wasn't much I could do. Now, as for the game's story, it's pretty good. I was engaged, I wanted to know what was happening, and it does reward you for paying attention. Now, I definitely wasn't on the edge of my seat to figure out what was going on, but there were a lot of moments where, because I took the time to remember a character's name, or who they cared about, or what objective they were after, I was able to find secret treasure, or even trigger a secret boss fight. So it is very much worth paying attention and engaging with the NPCs. So while it's not the best story I've ever played, there are moments you're going to care about, and paying attention will pay off. But now let's talk about the main thing people care about in Souls-like games, the boss fights. And honestly, we got kind of a mixed bag here. Some of these bosses are absolutely amazing, and some are not that great. Now, when they're really good, and when they're bad, they're not that bad, they're just not great. The bosses at the beginning of the game are made in a way to kind of ease you into the combat, following many tropes that you'd see in standard Souls bosses, more so just dodge and attack after a combo. But the game has a lot of humanoid boss fights, and these are the ones that I thought shown the most, because it feels a lot like Bloodborne hunter fights. And when the game gets going like that, that's what kept me addicted. There's really only one fight in the game that's kind of a gimmick, and this one is just not fun at all. Now the good thing is it's early on, it's not very hard, you'll knock it out in a couple tries at most. But when it comes to boss difficulty, it's a bit of a mixed bag too. There were some bosses that took 1 try, there were some bosses that took 30. Now like I said earlier, I did kind of play the game out of order, but that varying difficulty kept up consistently, and I had to figure out the way that each boss wants to be played. There's no one right answer, and I guess you could say that's good design actually. The way I fought humanoid bosses was very different than the way I fought big monsters, and I enjoyed the change of pace between the two. But overall, I think the bosses in this game are generally pretty good. I can't show any of my favorites because they're all in-game bosses, but overall, there's a pretty solid roster. Now, I've been generally pretty positive so far, so let's talk about some of the bad. Like I said, this game does have some issues. The ones I've talked about already: lack of weapon variety, muddy graphics at times. Performance was generally pretty good. I didn't have any crashes, and I kept a pretty stable 60 frames, except when loading into a new area. You'd get some drops, but it was never at a time where it got me killed or anything like that. I did have FPS max on, and with that I was able to keep 60 most of the time. Now, like I said, I was playing on PS5. I can't speak on the Xbox version, I can't speak on the PC version. I simply don't know. Another thing I disliked was some of the absolutely essential skills in this game are super confusing for no reason. For example, upgrading your healing flasks and weapon upgrades. I was halfway into the game before I realized that some of these nodes in the skill tree can be upgraded multiple times, and the only way to tell are the little dots at the bottom of the node that you can see on the flask ones. So I got all the way to chapter 4 with only a +4 weapon when I could have had a +9 by then, and only 5 healing flasks when I could have had 8. There's also an item called Temperance which buffs your weapon with an element and other stat enhancements that is super necessary, but the item you use to activate this is in the same part of the menu as regular consumables, so I thought it was only a one-time use, and again went through half the game before I realized it reset at shrines. Now, that's user error, but it could have been explained a lot better. Another thing I disliked were the amount of traps and ambushes in this game. Any chance the game gets to place an enemy around a corner and push you off a ledge, or an enemy that throws fire bombs next to some explosive barrels, the game will do it. Now, it's alleviated by the fact that the enemy density in this game is actually really well done. You're never going to get trapped in a tiny room with a million enemies, but man, the ambushes got old quick. I realize you have to check every single corner in this game, and if there's a bridge, expect there to be an enemy to push you off. Another part of the difficulty that felt a little cheap was the roll catching in boss fights. Now, in this game, when you get knocked down, the roll to get back up is pretty slow. However, I kid you not, every single boss in this game has a combo that is perfectly timed and designed to catch you as soon as you get back up from being knocked down. I'm being dead serious when I say I think 30 to 40% of all my deaths to bosses in this game came from roll catches. And I feel like if they could patch in and make this roll to get back up just a little bit faster, it would feel less unfair. So you kind of have to learn what to either delay that roll to get back up or which direction to roll in to not get caught. Another thing I think is a negative is that status effects really aren't explained. I mean, I beat the game, I still don't know what poise break does. And yeah, duh, I guess it breaks your poise. But you don't really have poise in the first place in this game. So how that actually translates into gameplay, I don't know. Now, the final real negative thing I want to say is that I think if you're an above average Souls player and figure out how to play this game pretty early on, I think it could potentially be too easy. Now, for me, I consider myself maybe above average, but I kind of had some handicaps. Like I said, it took me a while to figure out certain things about the way the game is intended to be played. And like I said, I got to chapter 4 before doing chapter 3, so I was playing at a bit of a handicap. But I did all the side content I could find, and by the time I got to the final boss, I was pretty overpowered, and I ended up killing it in just a few tries. So I think especially when guides start to hit the internet, you'll be able to break this game pretty easily. Now, before I give you my score, let me talk about some things that I really like. Again, the combat in this game is fantastic, but alongside that, the exploration in this game is some of the best I've ever played in a Souls-like. There are lots of little secrets tucked away, like shrines that give you rewards for gesturing, hidden doors that unlock secrets of their own, giving you consequential choices, invisible walkways leading to treasure, and overall just super creative level design. I never got bored of exploring things in this game, because it was always fun and it was always worth it. I also really loved the way the game incorporated the sound in the PS5 controller. Every time you perform a successful dodge or gain a stack of Skyborn Might, you get this really satisfying shing coming through the controller. Some people might find it annoying, I enjoyed it, but also the sounds like unlocking doors or ambient voices in the dark come through the controller as well, and I thought that was really cool. Now, most of the time in games like this, I'll play in the game's traditional language. For example, I played Wukong in Chinese, but I opted to play the English version of this, and the voice acting actually was good. I can't complain about it. Wuchang also has a transmog system, so you can fully customize the look of any armor at any time, while still retaining the stats of whatever you have equipped. But yeah, I ain't gonna get too deep into that. I think it's pretty obvious. And the final thing that really stood out to me was the lore around the feathering. I think they did a great job. It's hard to get into it without talking about spoilers. As you get further deep into the game, and you pay attention to the story, there's a really cool side section that you'll likely miss unless you're understanding what's going on in the background. And again, unfortunately, I think I locked myself out of this secret ending right at the end, but it was my favorite stretch of the game by far. So to really put a closer on it and give this game a score 1 through 10, I'm gonna go a 7.5. Objectively, I could definitely see the game rating around a 7, but for me personally, I would want to put it higher. That's why I'm adding a little 0.5. I really had a blast playing through this game, but I know it does have a lot of issues, which is why I'm gonna give it a bit of a lower score. Personally, I can look past a lot of that when I'm simply just having fun, and that was the case with this game, but I know everybody has different tastes. I know the game's coming to Game Pass, and it is $50. If you're someone that enjoys non-From Software Souls-like games, I definitely think it's worth playing. If you're looking for really good combat and really good level design, Wuchang Fallen Feathers ticks those boxes. But anyway, that's my review of the game. I'm not going to claim to be objective, so check out some others if you're on the fence. With all that though, if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to let me know by leaving a like on it and subscribe if you're new around here. But with all that, I will catch you in the next one.